Ghoulish greetings. This is Michigan Ghoul from the Satanic Coven of the Dark Goat. The sermon this week will focus on the Enochian keys, specifically the seemingly random set of numbers inserted throughout the keys, as well as the 30 letter groups included toward the end of the keys. Now, since there's an abundance of information on the Enochian calls, or Enochian keys if you prefer, on both the internet and in history books, there's no need to get into a great deal of discussion on that at this point. Just suffice to say that the keys were first scryed by Edward Kelly in the years 1583 to 1587 and written down and translated by Dr. John Dee from England. Anton LaVey, of course, reinterpreted some of them for his Satanic Bible and added some different wordings and so forth. The Joy of Satan did the same within the past 10 years or so and added some slightly different translations. The great magician Aleister Crowley also did some writings on the keys and what he termed angelic magic in general. One point that can't be emphasized enough is that in the days of Dr. John Dee and Edward Kelly, the church still held basically a full sway over the freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and freedom of religious thought. Now, with that in mind, we have to remember that the references to Jesus Christ, holy hosts, Holy Ghost, and so forth were basically pragmatic at the time. It was necessary, in fact, because the penalty for doing otherwise could have been burning at the stake, flogging, torture, thumbscrew, and rack, and so forth. So, to those who might say the keys were in fact angelic magic, again, remember that the gun was to their head, quite literally in those days, and they had to do with what they had and deal with the times and the cards that were dealt with them for those times. To get past the inquisitors and censors of the day, the writers and translators had to do some basically literary gymnastics to get around certain roadblocks, and they had to coach their words very carefully in cleverly concealed euphemisms and terms, and we'll see how that worked for the keys as we move on through this sermon. The first aspect of the keys that we're going to look at in this sermon are the seemingly random numerical groups that are spread out throughout the keys. Now, just for clarification, we're not dealing with all numbers mentioned in the keys, like for instance in the third key where Dr. Dee mentions the 12 kingdoms as well as the 12 seats of government. That's part of the sentence itself. What we're talking about here are random series of numbers inserted for no apparent reason, and it also has to be pointed out this is not included in Anton LaVey's Satanic Bible translation or in the Joy of Satan latter translation. This is only in Dr. John Dee's original translation, so you would need to find a copy either at your library or on the internet to follow along with this. There's 17 different locations for these random or seemingly random numbers, and I'm just going to read them off in order now to begin. 456 9639 456 19 696 36 7699 26 8 999 6 22 5678 3663 1636 6739 8763 7336 and 6332. Now, the interesting thing that we see that becomes apparent immediately is the multiple use of the numbers 6 and 9. And when we examine the 30 letter combinations at the end of the keys, we will see how those two codes actually do come together to the point of this sermon. While we're on the topic of the numbers listed, the random numbers, I just want to give you another piece of information that you'll see will tie in very neatly a little bit later on this sermon. The total of the numbers adds up to 138,104. Again, that's 138,104. If we add 1 plus 3 plus 8 plus 1 plus 0 plus 4, we get 17. And in turn, if we add 1 plus 7, 17, we get 8. And again, that's not going to mean anything right this moment, but it will tie in very shortly. When we look at the also seemingly random letter sequences toward the end of the Enochian keys, the 30 letter sets, These also, although they appear to be nonsense on the surface, are very well constructed and will come in handy in decoding the keys, as you'll see very shortly. Now, this next part regarding the squaring of the numbers is not my discovery. I read this in an internet article and I cannot remember the author, but I'm just recounting it here because it does play into the overall point of this sermon. When you look at these letters and you see how they're arranged, you see we have number 1 through 30 and they're done in the shape of a rectangle. If you add the square numbers, you will always get 62. Now, for instance, if you add 1 plus 26 plus 5 plus 30, you will get 62. If you add 2 plus 27 plus 4 plus 29, you will get 62. If you add 7 plus 22 plus 9 plus 24, you will get 62. When you add 12 plus 17 plus 14 plus 19, you will get 62. When you add 11 plus 16 plus 15 plus 20, you will also get 62. And keep in mind, 62 is a 6 and a 2. 6 plus 2 equals 8. Recall back to the numerical sequence. The numbers added together: 1, 3, 8, 1, 0, 4 equals 17. 1 plus 7 equals 8. Again, we see the number 8 cropping up in our research. Now, when we look again at the letters, take a look here down at number 26. We have the letters D, E, S. And now look at number 2. Down below, we have the letters A, R, N. Now, if we take the last letter of the former and the first letter of the latter, we get S-A. Okay, now lastly, do this. Looking at the chart, remove the last 8 letters between A in number 2 and the T in number 17, and we get the spelling Satan. Think again. Number 17, 1 plus 7 equals 8. Number 2 is a multiple of 8. And number 26, 2 plus 6 equals, well, you know. Okay, let's recap real quick. There are 17 seemingly random numbers. 1 plus 7 equals 8. We add up the sum total of the numbers, we get 8. 8 is also the 8th letter in the string of random numbers. There are 5 squares in the above table, and if you add the corner numbers, the squared numbers as shown above, you will always get 62, aka 6 plus 2 equals 8. The letters D, E, S are under the numerical heading of 26. 2 plus 6 equals 8. In the 30 table, after which we have a number 2, a multiple of 8, and the letters ARN. To unite the SA with TAN in number 17, and again 17, 1 plus 7 equals 8, we remove 8 letters and get Satan. Now, in conclusion, of course, there's a lot of room for interpretation here, and I'm open to any kind of constructive counter theories, criticisms, and so forth. But again, remember that Dr. John Dee and Edward Kelly had to have devised something very elaborate and very hard for the inquisitors to find in order to spell out the true meaning of the keys. It couldn't just be something easy that you could just look at and say, oh, that's what they mean. So I think it would be exactly along the lines of something that I just illustrated that would have been employed by them given the dangers of the time. And in spite of their overwhelming fear of being identified with anything satanic or demonic or devilish at the time, which, as we've explained before, is very understandable given the times they were in, I do believe that Dr. John Dee and Edward Kelly were both treaders of the left-hand path. That concludes this sermon for this week. Diablos vobiscum, and hail Satan.